I was thinking I should probably. There it is.
Sweet.
I have focus mode. There it is.
Nice. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Secular Literary Circle. I am. Oh, hello.
She's Susan.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know you needed that.
No, I just need to be able to see the video or something. I don't know. Cool. Hi, we're here.
Hi.
We're talking about Jesus and heaven and hell and stuff. She's Susan, like she already said. I'm Nathaniel. Leakai's in, I don't know, a different state. And we're at chapter 8 today.
Yes.
This is the chapter that I read. Let's see, I'm kind of on screen. Like an hour ago.
But the thing is, okay, so the title of the chapter, as you can tell from the title of the stream, is Jesus in the Afterlife. So we've finally gotten to this part of the book where we are talking about actual, like, Jesus now. So I think this is what a lot of people originally sort of thought the book was going to be about, was strictly about Jesus-y stuff. But luckily we have explored a lot more things in terms of, what other religions, their views of heaven and hell and afterlife and things of that nature. So we've gotten to the Jesus-y part.
Yay!
So this is definitely stuff that is up Nathaniel's alley.
Yeah, this Susan and I actually had a conversation about this earlier.
Yeah.
And it was she actually, because I didn't know what you were talking about, turned around and asked me a question that that I know like some stuff about, and had the conversation about it before I even knew that it was in this week's chapter.
Yeah. So
that was really cool. And Susan remembered a lot of it from stuff that we talked about a few months ago.
Yeah, it was a while back.
And so I was very impressed. She was impressed with herself as well.
Very proud.
For good reason. And so we are now here to regale you with what we learned today about the Jesus.
The Jesus.
So, and as per usual, hi guys, by the way, I'm actually here quietly in the corner, had a really intense experience. It was a pagan UPG night over on Ocean Keltoy server. We did some community stuff, might be a little bit before some folks from my server come over. But as per usual, for those of you who are new, because I see a couple of new names in the chat, we usually read part of the first paragraph and kind of start to get into each of the headers. If you're not reading along, you're missing out on a lot. We tend to go deep into things that interest us and talk at least briefly about each section of the chapter. So that's usually how these streams are set up. So I will start with the opening paragraph of this chapter is pretty dang short. It says... it's like 3 sentences.
Yeah.
Over 2 billion Christians in our world follow Jesus, and many of them believe that because of their faith, they will have a glorious afterlife. But how many of them know Jesus's own views of that, what Jesus's own views of that afterlife actually were? My sense is very few indeed.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so the first section, which is knowing the views of Jesus, goes into the challenge of figuring out what he even said, because as he points out, he's one of the few characters in the book that didn't leave us any writings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Jesus is a bit unique in that out of historical characters or historical figures, there is nothing written or said by him that is in the first person or by him at all. Everything is written much later, about his life anyway, is much later on, decades later, between 40 and 65 years. And so he's a bit unique in that.
Yeah.
And especially for being the most influential person in Western history.
That's true. So. Yeah. I love that it gets into this little story about this, this scholar. His name is Paul R. Coleman Norton. And he supposedly finds this stuff that is previously unknown phrases or previously unknown stuff that is said by Jesus. So he was stationed in French Morocco during World War II. And during this break in fighting, he had a chance to go to this town called Fedela. I'm going to say it's Fedela because where the accent is. So he was shown this book that was written in Arabic with a single, like a page or a couple of pages inside that were written in Greek, which just happened to be his actual specialty.
Yeah, he claims that it was just like inserted in there. So this is like some random extra scrap of paper that was in this book for some reason.
Right, yeah. So he actually was sort of looking through the page and sort of was like, oh my God, this is actually a super important thing that I have here. And supposedly it came from an ancient Greek commentary on the Gospel of Matthew. He, of course, didn't really have a way to actually take a photograph of it because it was World War II. So he just copied it by hand and in order to study it a little bit later. So supposedly, allegedly.
Oh, you gave it away already.
I know, I'm sorry.
Golly.
I kept saying supposedly.
Setting it up for giving it away.
I know.
Susan memeing in the corner over here, allegedly.
Allegedly, because you can say anything you want as long as you say allegedly. So he was surprised to find this previously unknown saying that was connected with the afterlife. And it was, did I say that it was on the Gospel of Matthew? I feel like I might not have.
I don't believe you did.
I did not. So in this writing that's in this ancient Greek, it is supposedly like commentary that is on the Gospel of Matthew. So it was discussing the actual parable of the faithful and unfaithful servant that is contained in Matthew 24. And it's dealing with this final verse in it where Jesus is talking about what's going to happen to the wicked and disobedient servant. So he's supposedly going to be cut into pieces and cast into the outer darkness, quote, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. That comes from Matthew 25:30. But in this Greek commentary that Coleman Norton had copied down, it did not end there. Dun, dun, dun. I don't know. So in these additional verses, the disciples were really confused by what Jesus had said, and they raised this possible objection, quote, but Rabbi, how can this happen for those who have no teeth? Jesus is then said to reply, oh, you of little faith, do not be troubled. If some have no teeth, then teeth will be provided.
Yeah.
Somehow, even when I was just reading the chapter initially, I was just like, I don't believe this story. Like, my little bullshit meter was going off.
Well, and of course, Ehrman then vindicated you with, well, yes, of course, he pulled this story completely out of his ass. Like, not even partially, but completely out of his ass. Because apparently, one of his grad students that he had as a teacher said that he used to tell this story as a joke well before World War II. So, so the illustration, like, he uses this as an example of people making up sayings of Jesus and how other other comments on the afterlife supposedly were just as fantastical. And he gives this example from a 130 CE of a collection called The Exposition of the Sayings of the Lord by Papias or Papias. So
I have heard you say that before. Yeah. I was like,
say it however you want.
Yeah.
If it's Greek, it would be Papias, I think.
Okay, fine. I'll call him Papias from now on. Shit.
But it says that the book wasn't ever preserved. So much like, say, Chrysippus, who is a Stoic, we only have bits of his preserved in commentaries from other writers. This guy's much the same. And he talks about how, like, he allegedly heard from impeccable authorities that Jesus expostulated on the glories of the afterlife, where people could live amazing lives, luxuriating in the abundance provided by the earth. And you get every grapevine would have 10,000 bows, every bow would have 10,000 branches, every branch 10,000 shoots, every shoot 10,000 clusters, every cluster 10,000 grapes, and each grape, when pressed, would produce 25 measures of wine. And he gives the example of stalks of wheat as well, which is just mind-blowingly excessive.
Yeah. And everything's in like the tens. Like tens and 10,000s and stuff like that. So it's just all, well, except for the 25 of the wheat. Because it's like each one has, what was it, 25 pounds? No, 25 measures on the I don't know. I read it. I remember random things. I can't help it. So Ehrman poses the question, did Jesus really believe that this is what the kingdom would be like? He's like, well, I mean, maybe, but you know, most of the interpreters actually think that it's these huge exaggerations that were later placed in the book, and that I feel is, which of the Gospels is it that somebody basically retconned and went back and added?
John.
Well,
yeah, John and Luke both have that, don't they?
John in and of itself was sort of like, you know, it's like super Jesus and stuff. So it's sort of like Jesus fan fiction in a sense. Was it in Matthew or Mark?
Mark and John.
Mark and John? Okay.
You have appendixes in Mark and John.
Okay. Because I know the way that you can tell is that it's a very different writing style.
Yeah.
Hey, Maddie.
Right? Yeah. Writing style is different.
Oh, hey.
And they're usually out of... they usually have a different, more of a supernatural, like if you can think of something more than supernatural than rising from the dead, then they would be more than that, because it would be things that happened after he came back. He commands them to pick up snakes and shit.
Oh yeah, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's in Mark 16.
Yeah.
And then John 21 speaks about he did all these miraculous deeds, and the person writes in the first person in this as well, which is very telling considering that the rest of the book is in third person.
Yeah.
And says, I suppose there would not be enough room on the planet to write down all of the things that he did in his 40 days he was around. So, you know, it's a little bit of hyperbole and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, things that you wouldn't see in the book.
Yeah. It's that exaggeration stuff.
Yeah.
Like Ehrman points out. Yeah.
Which he also then goes on to point out that, you know, the Gospels themselves, which are considered to be the most reliable, particularly the first three, were written significantly after he died, or was said to have died, you know, at least 65 years, if the dating is accurate that we have. And he said that, you know, because we have this history of people putting words in other people's mouths in their writings, it's quite likely that at times these authors of these books could very well have done the same with Jesus. And so he talks about the methods that historians would use to figure out, okay, well, what do you think he actually said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's, I don't know if I'm sort of skipping ahead, but the conversation that Nathaniel and I had earlier, because what he was saying was I just sort of turned around and I'm just like, so what's that word, or what's that phrase? And Dr. Ehrman I was about to call him Bart. that is way too familiar. Dr. Ehrman basically mentions all of these sort of how you can tell if something is actually sort of historically accurate, right? I just sort of turn around and I'm all like, what is that phrase for when you have, you know, and I read him the sentence where it's basically you have these independent, or no, it wasn't the independent attestations, it was a criterion of dissimilarity, where you have, you know, the authors are known critics of what they're documenting, and they're still documenting something that would go against what they would actually want or be prone to say was happening. Mm-hmm. Is that basically the gist of the criterion of dissimilarity? Sort of, kind of. You can explain it a lot better than I can. I know that.
I don't know about that. It's that when you're looking for, like if you're looking at one of the books, does it say the same thing in the other book type stuff? And it's like, you know, are these things like match up and stuff and whatnot? And that's what you get with dissimilarity.
Yeah.
So
and then
pretty close.
Yeah.
I was gonna let Allie explain them.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Well, Aaron does actually talk about both looking at what matches up in the oldest sources and how close they were to the time that actually happened. But much like Susan brought up, there was also the idea of do critics, people who very clearly would not believe this, also quote very closely to the things that you're seeing. And if you have a number of people, all from very different backgrounds who cannot be connected to one another, because that's another thing that he talks about, is these are not people who could have spoken during their lifetimes or something like that. Or if they did, you know, they would have had to be very, very distantly, you know, like not related to one another in any way. If a bunch of people, all independent of one another, close to the time, and, you know, unable to have contacted one another to create a coherent narrative, all say the same thing, it probably happened that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so he then starts to go into the quotations about the things that Jesus said about the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts off with the fact that Jesus was convinced that the kingdom of God, not the rapture, because that's a later doctrine significantly, but the remaking of the world, so to speak, for paradise was going to happen very, very soon.
Yeah, because Jesus was an apocalypticist.
Yes.
Like, plain and simple. Like, he was an apocalypticist.
Yes.
And a lot of what he says actually, you know, sort of has him going, hey, you could, like, preaching the whole apocalypticist thing of saying, you know, this is all going to happen very, very soon. And there's actually a part where he says, you know, where there's an exact...
It's Mark 13, there's Mark 9:1. Some of those standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come to power, which is Mark 9:1. Right. And they also have Mark 13:30. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away before these things take place. So he was convinced that in his lifetime or the lifetime of his followers, this stuff was going to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like that. And when I say like, it's sort of like when you say I find it funny, when it's not funny, haha, it's like a funny, weird sort of thing. You know, ever since then, it's been that people have sort of stretched it out and been like, you know, I mean, maybe it's not going to happen in our lifetime, but it'll be someday eventually. And, you know, it'll be 100 years. So, oh no, and now it's like, oh, it'll just happen eventually.
Yeah.
Sort of thing, right?
Yeah, you can actually see that evolution from Mark to John, because Jesus is very much an apocalypticist in Mark,
mm-hmm.
and then John is basically fighting against it, which is another way for us to be able to tell that his disciples had all died by that point.
Oh, yeah.
So there you go.
Mark was written in about 70.
Yeah.
And then John was like 90 to 95.
Yeah, some people put it past the beginning of the 2nd century, but somewhere around there, I'd say. And that's after they all died.
Yeah.
And so you get some of those later insertions for more supernatural stuff, more of the maybe not in your lifetime type stuff. It's going to be at some point, you know, something like that, where, you know, keep your eyes open. Nobody knows the day or the hour, even though Jesus did say that he knows the day and the hour in previous books. So yeah, that's you can see the evolution of that throughout the 4 Gospels, and then into some of the other apocryphal Gospels as well. You can really see that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Which one of the apocryphals is your favorite? Thomas?
Yeah, Gospel of Thomas is pretty good.
Yeah.
Gospel of Peter. I'm a fan of the Gospel of Judas, the Gnostic Gospel of Judas.
Mm-hmm.
Judas.
Sorry.
So we end up getting into what the actual kingdom of God is supposed to be as well, which is under the heading, the kingdom for some, but destruction for most. And this is where Ehrman kind of takes the piss out of any idea of hell that most modern Christians have. Because basically what he says is, so Jesus speaks in parables like a lot, and he talks about how people will be cast into the darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. But he notes, he doesn't say here that the people are going to be tormented. He doesn't say anything about eternal fires burning them. Instead, it's just darkness.
Yeah, it's just like he actually says, like it's annihilation. And he's talking about the actual idea of what's that, Gehenna?
Yeah.
Gehenna, and and what it's thought to be.
Yeah.
And it's thought to be like this specific place. And does it end up being that specific place? I can't remember.
No, Gehenna has multiple. He doesn't bring up the rest of the mythological origins of the place Gehenna either, but Gehenna ends up not being a spiritual place, but rather a physical place,
right?
Up in northern, which would be Syria, and it's mentioned in the Old Testament and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a place where there's death and stuff like that.
And that's where he's talking about. There's these fires that are always burning.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I think that's probably where some of the idea of like the fire and flames of hell and things of that. Yeah.
Well, part of what he notes there is that the reason that place is considered to be so terrifying is that human sacrifice to Canaanite deities took place there. And so Yahweh is said to have scorched the earth, so to speak, so that it is no longer sacred. You can't do offerings there. You can't even live there if you're a part of his cultus because the ground itself has been defiled. Mm-hmm. And so he then goes into, okay, so what about these funeral pyres they're talking about? Well, people who die by the executioner's hand, their bodies still burn for a long period of time after the life is extinguished from them. So the idea of this funeral pyre not going out is less that somebody's going to keep burning still alive and feeling the pain, and more that their bodies are going to be gotten rid of. Because again, as we noted in chapters 6 and 7, the Pharisees, which Jesus was one, did not believe in a soul resurrection going to some kind of heaven or some other place. They believed in a physical bodily resurrection into a paradise on earth where they would basically be granted a second shot at Eden.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the whole idea of the like the breath and the life coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So woohoo!
Yeah.
I feel like I'm actually like able to sort of
you're
keep up with this.
Yeah, you're nailing all of it.
I'm very proud of myself.
I don't know where you guys are at in the book now.
You help more than you will ever know. You have such a good handle on so much of this. Like you understand this in ways that I don't think I ever will be able to.
No, you're doing a really good job.
No.
So the section we're on, we're at page, if you're using the same e-copy that I am, we're at page, let me check. We're on the section that says rewards for the saints in the words of Jesus. So we're talking about rewards now rather than just the annihilation portion. Yeah. So it looks like we're on page 144 or 145.
Okay, yeah.
Or no, 148.
Oh,
148, okay.
Oh, so we're past that part.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that part. Okay.
Oh, well, if we're not past if you want to back up for a sec, we're only 20 minutes.
I did skip way past.
No, it's fine. Because it's way back there, it's fine. I'll make a note about it and put it in the description or something like that.
Well, now I want to hear.
Well, no, it's nothing. I was just gonna go into some things that were in Matthew.
Oh no, I want to hear.
Yeah, let's do that. That's part of the reason we do these is so that people can go in a little further into certain topics and, take advantage of your knowledge. So talk about it. We've got plenty of time.
Oh, all right.
I want to hear.
I don't.
But then again, I always want to hear you talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, God. You guys are so adorable. It makes me sick. You're getting the chat saying you want to hear. You've now been pressured, Nathaniel. Congratulations.
Well, listen to Grumpy. Grumpy actually knows more than I do.
Well, Tapioca Weasel says they want to hear. And so does Rilla.
Yeah. Hi, Rilla.
Yeah, we didn't really get into talking about John the Baptist earlier and stuff like that either, which is a rather important thing for thinking about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And because he taught the exact same things that Jesus did, and that's really, or that John the Baptist taught the same things that Jesus did, and those things, and that's really important when we get into. You mentioned the parable of the weeds and stuff like that, and Jesus mentions a character as the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm.
And so earlier we were talking about the criterion of dissimilarity, which we didn't actually get into, nor we get into the criterion of independent attestation, even though you kind of did, we didn't really. And then the criterion of contextual credibility and stuff like that. And so Jesus in the New Testament talks about the Son of Man a lot. Also the Son of God. Now the Son of God is a very specific term, and it's actually given to the kings of the Jews, the anointed ones, or the Messiah. And that's what Jesus would have been, the King of the Jews. He also speaks about the Son of Man, though. And in some areas, in some ways, he's actually speaking about the Son of Man like he does in Matthew chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 7, Matthew chapter 10, as a third-person Son of Man.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we got into this a little bit earlier, right?
Not like this. This is when Jesus speaking in the first person versus the third person regarding a different being. The greatest thing about like dissimilarity is we're able to we can tell when Jesus was talking about himself. So Jesus saw himself as the Son of Man, but he also saw the Son of Man as a different character. And this is really cool. The way that we're able to tell if Jesus is actually talking about himself as the Son of Man is when he's speaking about himself in the third person.
Yeah.
Jesus, if you'll notice about the attributes that he brings up about himself throughout the text, especially in the books of Mark and Matthew, when he speaks about himself in the third person, it's when he's actually talking about himself. So these are things with dissimilarity that he would have actually said, because it follows with everything else. Like then he says that the Sabbath is made for man.
Yeah.
He's speaking in this third person, and everything. Well, we just kind of glitched there. And everything that he says about you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. Those are things where he's talking about himself. Right.
Yeah.
But when he says, I am going to be doing these things are things that he likely never said, because it's out of character for Jesus to say these things in the first person.
Yeah, the historical context.
Yeah. And it's also something we're able to get into contextual credibility with. This is something that they would have said later. We see this all over the place in John. Where he's like the double-edged sword and bullshit like that. These are things that Jesus wouldn't have actually said, and he preaches about himself in the first person. I'm going to do this. I'm going to come back. I'm the way and the truth and the life. Yes, all those things. Yeah.
There's an example. I'm so sorry. There's an example that Dr. Ehrman brings up in the book with the historical context. He says it's sort of like if you have a 1920s chef or cook talking about problems they're having with their microwave.
Yeah.
Historically, that makes no sense. Like in historical context, it's somebody tell me the word I'm looking for.
Dissimilar. It's dissimilarity.
No, it's an A something. Somebody's gonna know the word I'm looking for.
Ahistorical?
No, that's not quite it.
You're not looking for.
I'm gonna remember the word like.
You're not looking for. Yeah, no, you're not looking for apocryphal.
No.
Hello, Ilya.
It would be something that would be at that point. It would be dissimilarity because that's not something that existed in the 1910s, 1920s. Right. So somebody talking about it, that's also contextual credibility.
Anachronistic.
There we go. Thank you.
Also something that that somebody wouldn't be able to say then.
Right.
This is the same thing as Jesus walking up, and this is in John 18, where he's instead of Judas coming up and giving him a kiss on the cheek, and he's like, Judas, why? How could you? In the book of Mark, which is what you see in the book of Mark, chapter 14, in John 17, what you see is Jesus walks up across like this creek, and he's like, who the f- are you here looking for? And they say, I'm looking for Jesus. That's what they say. Yeah, and then he's like, I'm looking for, he says, I am he. And they fall down.
Because, and that's just not.
Yeah, these are things that they would have added later. And so it violates both contextual credibility as well as dissimilarity.
Yeah.
And, there's a large difference there. And so when Jesus here is talking about these things that are in the third person in Matthew 3, Matthew 7, Matthew 10, and actually speaking and alluding back to these things that he would have read in the Hebrew Bible. These are things that Jesus likely made parables about, because it's something you see in all the Gospels. It's things that an apocalyptic preacher believed, and he's speaking in this third person.
Yeah.
And so all of this all passes historical criterion. And it's not editorial fatigue. Screw you, Mark Goodacre, for putting that in people's heads. The Q source exists, you motherfucker. All right? You of scholarly stuff at Duke University.
You called it literary fatigue earlier, right?
Yeah, it's
Like
either one.
It's the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. So stupid.
Damn you, Mark Goodacre.
That's
the second time that he has said that name today.
There are people that are in the chat that are going to disagree with me. I don't care. But
also, formal thank you to Tapioca Weasel, and formal thank you to you, Aaliyah Kai, for pointing that out.
Yeah.
That said that. So thank you.
No problem.
Like whenever it talks kingdom. This is, besides an allusion to, and this is where you can actually get into
you guys did a glitch again.
Oh
yeah,
no,
we're glitched on the screen.
Oh no.
Nope, now you guys are fixed again. I don't know what happened. I think your net derped.
Yeah, it does.
Mother.
It's a good computer. It's not great internet. There we go. We're good.
Yeah.
Yay.
But this is actually another idea where we talk about Jesus speaking about those who do this will shine like the sun in the kingdom. When we think about, we look into the four gospels at the end of them, you get this idea of what Jesus looked like. And this is different than what Paul says he looks like.
Of Tarsus.
Yes, Paul of Tarsus. That's his last name. And because if you read the four gospels, not Mark, by the way, but if you read these gospels, what you see is that it's not the shining like silver like angels.
Right.
He looks like a regular person.
Right.
Who they either can or can't touch. Depends which gospel you read. But you go to John's stuff and you read what John wrote in 1 Corinthians. You read what he writes in Galatians. That's the image he gets. It's the silver person that is both physical and a spirit.
Ethereal.
Yes, that has been renewed. That is shining like a diamond. Shine brightly like a diamond.
So is that
Rihanna.
Or a vampire?
No, it's a diamond, Rihanna.
Sparkling.
Is
that where the concept of like they will not have their earthly bodies anymore, or like their earthly bodies will be like improved on and they won't have any of their blemishes and
correct
stuff?
Yeah, and that's what you see from Paul's writings,
right?
But you don't see it in the gospels,
right?
So what do we see here? We see that something that Jesus may have said, because Paul believed it as well. That's important.
Yeah,
because Paul, coming from up, and again Tarsus is up on the northeast side, in not in Palestine, would have had these same types of Hellenistic views, duality and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you don't see it when he resurrects in the three gospels. And that matters because the Jewish people, or the Christians that are writing this, got this information from the Jewish people and not from this other apocalyptic style of teaching. And so there are differences here, but we can actually look at the contextual stuff and be able to figure out if Jesus actually said it or not. And
John is very, very Hellenic. Like everything I've read in John and Revelation, there's so much Hellenism there.
Oh yeah, incredible amount of Hellenism. Luke is the best example of it. But so even like in reading these little things, I think that Christians and non-Christians alike, usually atheists in America, tend to read Matthew and then they read Mark and then they read Luke and then they read John. And it appears to be a very, the stories all match up. And then you read them and you're like, let me read Mark in this same story. Now let me read it in Matthew. And you see these differences that begin to appear. And then you read it in Luke, if it's there. And then you read it in John. You see these enormous differences. And it's like Jesus goes from the first to the third person, or vice versa. Or he speaks about something in more literary terms.
Right.
Versus more. And so you really get the idea of what did Jesus actually mean. And that becomes into this that comes into this type of what he's talking about with historical methods and criterion to be able to establish not only did Jesus say this, but also did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
When did it happen? In what order? And as well as what was the significance of it happening?
Well, and you see that also, like, I wanted to build up on that and let you finish your thought. But I'm doing my video that's coming out on Thursday is on demons and the idea of demons within the Bible. And what you find that's interesting is that the word that demon comes from, daimones, it appears only once in the New Testament, and that's in Paul. Within, like, the Gospels, it's interesting how you talk about the order that the Gospels were said to have been written in, because you see things get more and more Greek the further you get away from Mark. Mark is very much like looking at things from a very Hebrew like context, but you start to see more and more allusions toward trying to differentiate themselves from Greek thought the further away from Mark you get.
I can see that.
Like particularly in the exorcism stories, which are the ones that I was studying.
I can see that. That makes sense.
Matthew is interesting when it comes to that. I don't know about the exorcism stories, but you can actually get some of these.
The exorcism stories that I'm referencing are the unclean spirits, the pneumata akatharton that were cast out of the pigs, and the one that was cast out of the man.
Oh, the Legion.
Legion.
Do you mean the ones that when he crossed the Sea of Galilee, found the people that were super sick and he cast them into the pigs and they ran 25 miles to the Sea of Galilee?
Yep, that one. They like people think that those are demons or daimones, but it's like, no, those are actually unclean spirits, which has to do with miasma, the Greek concept of miasma. It's got nothing to do with like what Christians now think of as demons.
Huh. Makes sense. I like it.
Let's see. Where,
so we were just past Gehenna. Oh, rewards for the saints. Yeah, right there.
There you go.
Yay!
All right, I've been talking a lot. You guys have fun.
I know. I love hearing you talk about that stuff. I really do.
Thanks, babe.
Yeah. So rewards for the saints, in the words of Jesus. I have to sort of like refresh my memory because some of the I had to skim just a little bit. I can't. That's so.
Well, it's interesting. We've got the reintroduction of the Sadducees into the story, which we talked about a little bit last week. They were the sort of ruling power, like they were the majority of Jewish thinkers at that time, which they didn't believe in the resurrection basically at all. And this talks about the story where Jesus gets confronted by the Sadducees.
Oh yeah, so this is when they're talking about they're referencing with the whole like, well, you know, a man dies, he's married, he dies, his wife has to marry his brother so they can carry on the line, but they you know, they're talking to Jesus and they're just all like, well, you know, what if it happens that the guy dies and then the wife marries the brother and they don't have any kids and the brother dies and the wife marries the other brother, and it goes down this list basically. You know, what happens, you know, who does the wife actually get reunited with whenever there's the resurrection, you know, whenever, you know, everybody's like, ooh, yay, everybody's reunited.
Yeah.
So Jesus is all like, well, okay, so you jerks, you're trying to trap me, and you can't trap me because that's not how it's going to work. You know, Jesus is like, no, it's going to be, you know, that nobody is actually married whenever the resurrection.
Yeah, they'll be like angels.
Yeah. So it won't be like a marriage thing.
Well,
correct me, please.
No, it's not you. The differentiation that's made between angels and the spirits of humans is a little bit different, but yes, there is. You're not yoked to anybody in the positive afterlife, which is not actually an afterlife at all, because you're just resurrected to life here.
And that idea of the Eden stuff.
Yes, yeah. This is the third heaven.
Oh yeah.
Whoa.
Oh no. Are we good? We're good.
I think so.
Okay, we're good. We saw a little jump for a second there. We have the stream going at the time.
So let's say you say that Sadducees?
Sadducees.
I don't know.
How do you say that?
I don't know. I'm asking Allie.
She said Sadducees. Like with the double D.
I pronounced it. No, I'm here. I've been muting in between because I'm eating popcorn and nobody wants to hear me chewing on it. But no, I said Sadducees just because, like, if I were to actually pronounce it in Greek, it would be Sadukes, because there isn't unless it's got a sigma where the two C's are. But if you've got two K's, that would be what it would be. But like, I don't actually know how you'd pronounce that in Hebrew. I'd have to actually see the Hebrew word. So like, I will bend to your expertise here.
How do you say it?
I just said Sadducees because that's the Anglo way to say it. And but if it's Sadducees, that's what I'm gonna say from now on.
Sadducees.
But yeah, it's basically a person's not yoked whenever they are resurrected. There is no yoke left. There is I imagine we'll get into it later on with these ideas that Christians have of heaven and the being that it is with heaven, and that we are and how we're resurrected and into what form we're resurrected, which we'll find. I'm certain he'll get into that because I've already done it with what Paul, which is next week. Paul is next week. Even Paul's version of this is completely different than modern, especially evangelical Christians. And so it's an interesting evolution of Jesus through the Gospels, and then through the book of Acts, which is supposedly the Acts of the Apostles after kind of after Jesus resurrected, kind of Luke. So you get to like chapter 4.
I have a distinct remembrance, and I've mentioned this to you before. I have a distinct remembrance of when I was Little Miss Evangelical Christian when I was in high school. Somebody asked me, like, I was in the middle of studying the New Testament, and we had a Bible class that I took in Texas, because Texas, they asked me, I can't find any instances of God striking anybody down in the New Testament. And I was just all like, there's one in Acts. Yeah. It was like Acts 4 or 5.
Yeah, Acts 4.
Acts 4. Yay! Yep. Woo! I remembered.
Yeah.
That's just it's just a random little thing that I remember from my days as a weird Christian.
Well, and Ehrman really drives home this idea of when these people are resurrected, they might be resurrected to a recreated earth, but there will be no suffering. They get this eternal, exalted existence because they've already suffered in this life.
Yes, which makes sense.
I feel like that's sort of brought over from stuff that we discussed in the last chapter.
Yeah.
With this idea of, you already had your suffering here on Earth. So you're not going to have, you're obviously not going to have any more. That's something that's sort of brought over from the later Jewish thinkers.
Yeah, the apocalypticists who would have been in the northern sections of Palestine. Yep, and which have been passed down to John the Baptist, and now the voice in the wilderness crying out, "Prepare the way of the Lord."
Or if you're,
so he talked.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Very British.
Very British. I love it. Or if you're from the musical Godspell, I can't sing too much of that. Otherwise, we're going to get a copyright strike.
So that's what brings us to Jesus, the sheep, and the goats, which is a story that a lot of Christians take very literally, but he argues is most likely a parable.
It is. Yeah. Which is also kind of funny. The funniest part about this, to me, I'm speaking more loudly on purpose, because listen to me, Donald Trump fans. Sheep are a good thing in the Bible. Okay? So if you're a sheep, it's a motherfucking compliment. Okay?
Even I knew that.
Trollthaniel.
Huh?
I said Trollthaniel is currently out.
No, I'm being fucking serious. God dang it. And serious. Very serious about this. Stop calling people sheep. Okay? Because it's not an insult. Because according to Jesus, the sheeps is the goods.
Sheeps.
Okay?
Because he talks about like
Stop
the
insulting.
Shepherd and stuff.
He does.
Right?
He's the good shepherd.
Shepherd. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The shepherds and the sheep are in the very beginning in the book of Luke. The shepherds are watching their flocks by night. Those are the shepherds. That is hello metaphor for that. He's talking about the sheep through there. The sheep are the ones that are separated from the goats, who are the bad ones. This is all very much positive. So stop calling people sheep, because that means they're the good ones, which means we're the good. Never mind. This makes sense now. I got you. Go ahead. Keep calling us sheep. We're good. We're all good. I'll be a sheep.
I just like making goat sounds.
Well, you want to know what's interesting also, this comports with ancient Jewish actual purification practices, which is another thing that came up during my research. So let's go down a rabbit hole for 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Azazel, who was an angel under Yahweh's command, he later was reclassified as a demon by demonologist Christians in the Middle Ages. There's a whole heap and thing about that I didn't go into in the video. But during one of the Jewish purification rituals, Azazel was considered to be a physical, half-human, half-goat hybrid angel thing that lived out in the desert. And he would receive the sin-laden goat offering so that the sheep offering given to Yahweh during a particular purification ritual would remain pure. That's where you get some of that dichotomy. And sheep's blood and ram's blood were considered to be purifying within Hellenic culture as well.
Ah. Oh. I just got... It is like the cake song. Sorry. Can you highlight that last one for me, please?
Yeah. Just grab this right there. That's what she's talking about.
It is like the cake song. Sheep go to heaven, goats go to hell. I just got that. How have I been a cake fan since I was like
Avion
Piscean 33? Thank you.
Thank you.
How have I been a cake fan for the last like half of my life?
Don't know.
And I just got that.
Ilya says, "Can I be a pygmy goat?" Sure.
Meh. So anyway, sorry. I'm
Yeah.
very
So
excited.
this is going to surprise a lot of people, but a lot of this stuff is not new. So it's like, don't tell the Christians. If you're a Christian watching, don't tell yourself this. Very little of what Jesus says is actually unique. These ideas that if you've been watching for the past 7 chapters prior to this, none of this stuff isn't unique.
No.
This is, as you can see, and I like the build up to this as well, because it really shows that everything Jesus is saying came from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is, sure, it's Hellenistic, but that's also Hellenistic stuff comes from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very, very, very intertwined and interconnected. So
I feel like it's sort of what what the writers of the Gospels felt like was the best parts of different schools of thought and religions and stuff.
Yeah,
you see that. Go on.
It's what most closely lined up with their view, as well as their current view of what Jesus taught, along with those that they had been introduced with. And so it's just like
yeah. Were you saying, Ilya? Okay.
Oh, I was saying that's basically what the Catholic Church did with Platonism. Like, that whole quad omni God thing came directly out of Plato, and so did a lot of the theology regarding the way, like, spirits and angels and daimones and all that stuff work. Like, they just decided, like, hey, by the way, the one that's in Platon, like, that's actually Yahweh, yoink, and built their entire theology effectively out of his work.
That just sort of cobbled together, as it were. Cobble.
I snark about that in my current video that I've been working on, but like, legitimately, it is a thing that happened, and you can see like the early church fathers writing about it even.
Oh yeah, I'd imagine so. Yeah,
that'd be interesting to see. Let's see. So he talks about, "Truly I say to you, as much as you did these things in the least of these," because this actually this is one of my favorite stories, and it's in the Gospel of Matthew. He speaks in parables in Matthew, and he says, from Matthew 23 to Matthew 25, he's speaking in these parables, and he says, "When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When naked, you clothed me. When sick, you visited me. And when in prison, you came to me." And so in this, it's like the sheep are saying this, but in this case, it's the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And the disciples are like, "How the could we have done that? We never met you before. We were fisher people."
Yeah.
And Jesus then responds with some of, I think, the best wording. He says, truly I say to you, as much as you did these things for the least of these, you did them to me. And this is this is new stuff. This is new theology. This is new action.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything that's in the Bible is copied from somewhere else, but this is great, because Jesus does have these kind of moments. He does have these kind of progressive ideas that are not just progressive at the turn of the first century, but progressive even today, which is the more that you do for the least, the more you will get in return. And getting that in return is not getting it in some sort of, I'm going to earn something with it.
Right.
But rather it's an internal thing.
Yeah.
And Jesus speaks about that. And this is a new concept. And
it's actually not that new, which is interesting.
Oh, never mind that. I'm completely wrong. Again.
Yeah, there was... It's not entirely, you're not completely wrong. It may have been new within Jewish culture, but within Hellenic culture, there's actually a long history of this idea that Xania or Cania, which my main show is based off of, that the gods themselves will come disguised to your home, so to speak, and the way that you treat them will determine certain things. The idea of always treating strangers with kindness, because, as you treat any individual person, that could be a god. And being rewarded for that.
There you go.
It's somewhat related.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. So appreciate you.
With you.
I was wrong. That happened.
I wasn't trying to be a dick. I hope I wasn't.
No. I
can see what both of y'all are saying.
Well, I know, but I was wrong because I said Jesus was unique in that, and I was not correct. I still like the parable, and
So let's see.
Well, I was going to do the Matthew 20, the rest of the parable, but
let's see.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. I'm reading so I can follow along with you.
Oh, I know. I was just the next part that gets into dissimilarity, and I already went over dissimilarity earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not really. This is how we know Jesus said it type stuff.
Yeah. And I think if there's anybody who can be very objective in, making sure that we're being critical, but not in the, nitpicky sense. We're being critical in the scholarly sense. I think if there's anybody who can be critical, it's going to be Bart Ehrman.
Yeah,
for sure.
He's a critical New Testament scholar.
Yeah, because he can come at it with, much like you, with the exegesis.
Yeah.
Exegetical.
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap! I thought I was making up.
Yeah, this entire book is basically like modern day Christians do the eisegesis. Let's actually exegete for a minute and figure out what people were really saying in a lot of these passages, which is something I really appreciate about it.
Yeah. And I have to say, I know, because I had appreciated your mythicist deep dive a great deal. I really, really did. I still do. This is helping me definitely take a more critical look at the idea of, and especially this chapter, it's helping me take a more critical look at the idea of the mythicism stuff. Because I've always, my mythicism, it's been like not a hardline mythicist sort of thing. It's not, I'm just remain unconvinced, but, that not only, the stuff in this chapter and previous chapters, mostly really in this chapter, but with talking with you and you able to break it down much like Dr. Ehrman does in a very understandable way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not leaning towards the mythicist side anymore. I hadn't told you that yet. I'm just saying.
Oh.
Just thought you would.
Oh, good.
Enjoy that.
Well, then you'll be right pretty soon then. Good for you.
Woo!
Oh yeah, by the way, Richard Carrier hosted a fucking Nazi today. So that's new.
Oh, Richard Carrier.
Yeah.
Oh, why?
You piece of shit. Anyways.
Oh, Richard Carrier.
So apparently Nathaniel has turned to the dark side, which, by the way, if you guys didn't catch their interview on my channel last night, you guys should totally go check that out. That's where that joke comes from. But yeah,
Richard Carrier hosted a Nazi.
No, I'm talking about me calling you having turned over to the dark side. I called you the Jedi to Chrissy H's Sith when it comes to dealing with mythicists because you're nicer than Chrissy often is. And yeah, seriously, fuck Richard Carrier for hosting a Nazi.
Yeah, their point, I found out about it from Chrissy.
Yeah.
And I think
y'all bring balance.
Yeah, there's a point where, I mean, you gotta I mean, come on, Luke isn't always happy, right?
Oh.
Yeah. So fuck that dude. Well, just in general, Richard Carrier. But also
just in general. Don't listen to Richard Carrier. In general.
Unless he's talking about first century Rome.
But even then you can probably find somebody who knows more.
Possibly.
Anyway. So
yeah, he's been a piece of shit for a long time.
How much where did we before I sort of derailed stuff because I do that.
No, you're good. I don't know.
Well, the chapter just sort of ends on the note of like, hey, by the way, the reason that I didn't mention a bunch of other passages is that I'm about to make the argument that those were added on later or put in his mouth by people who wrote the books rather than him actually saying that.
Yeah.
And so, like, he concludes by talking about kind of what we discussed earlier, which is the idea that when, that he preached that the afterlife would come during the lifetimes of his followers. And when that doesn't happen, adjustments have to be made. And that's where a lot of these later quotes about the afterlife and about things coming way off in some other date get added on later or by the authors themselves. And that's what we're going to start getting into in the next couple of chapters.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Paul next week.
Yay!
Very excited about that. Paul is the most popular character in the New Testament.
Of Tarsus.
Yep.
He's at the very least the most prolific.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote 7 books of the New Testament of the purported 14 that he's purported to have written 14. And so he wrote 6 or 7 of them. There's one of them you could go either way. It really doesn't matter. And so that's going to be interesting. I don't know if he actually talks about the pseudographical stuff or not, but
we'll see.
This was an interesting chapter. It was really cool to go in there and see a lot of the things that I had kind of gone over with folks over the course of the past 9 months or so.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, look, I could teach this class. So, well, most of it.
Well, and
I learned some stuff today too.
Yeah. And I think that's how you know. That's how you know you're reading Bart Ehrman is when Nathaniel can learn stuff too.
No, I learned it from Allie.
Stuff.
Yeah. But
so what I really liked the most about this chapter and was the fact that again, his Dr. Ehrman's writing is just so relatable, and you're able to understand it in a very, very, in a very, very base level. If I could ever get Bart Ehrman on Explain Like I'm 5, I would be the happiest person in the world. You never know. It's worth a try. We can host him. It'll be fun.
Dr. Ehrman, yeah.
So, yeah, but I really liked the fact that I was able to relate previous conversations that you and I have had about a lot of the same stuff that's contained in this chapter. And I was able to sort of go, oh my gosh, like I can relate. I can, actually put this in a context that, oh my gosh, I know what he's talking about. Because you and I have had those conversations. Mm-hmm. So we already have this like base level of understanding because you've been able to explain it to me in a way that is very, very similar to Dr. Ehrman. Mm-hmm. In a way that's relatable and it's understandable.
Yeah, I emulate his teaching style as well as the teaching styles of others as well.
You do.
Because I think he does a great job. I think he is able to really, to bring people in to an audience, or bring pieces of audience in and really make it easy for people to follow along and stay engaged, energized, and things like that.
Yeah.
And something I guess I don't always do so well with that part, but I try to emulate what he does and says. So
yeah.
Well, and this book in particular is very much constructed to lead you down a particular path toward an argument, which is, he gives so much examples of the way that scholarship is done, about the way that we understand certain things from different, cultural contexts, both using mythology a lot to explain various cultural values, which is something that I value quite a bit and try to do in my own work when I pull, examples from scholarship.
Yeah.
And, he very much makes it clear that he's not just projecting or assuming these things, that there's a strong historical foundation for the claims he's making. And he does it in such a way that he's not talking down to you, which I think is very, very cool.
Yeah. And I think that's another way that I find him very much like you, is that you don't talk down to people whenever you're explaining stuff.
Oh, I gotta start doing that.
You were wonderful.
Thanks, man.
And I love you.
Love you too. Well, I think that's about it for today.
Yeah. As always, we strongly encourage people to pick up the book. If you buy it from Simon & Schuster, that is really the ideal way to do it. You can get a digital copy of it from them as well. Definitely go and support Dr. Ehrman's work. He does a lot of really, really great stuff. It's not just stuff that is necessarily, the explain like I'm 5 version of stuff. He gets into a lot of very much higher level stuff, actually, with apologies to Dr. Ehrman, because one of the books that is currently elevating our tripod is How Jesus Became God. So with apologies to him for that.
That one's on our list potentially for future voting, because we were talking about alternating between science books and books on history and stuff, and that was on that list that we had talked about potentially putting out for folks to vote on.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
Yeah.
So, and we're still taking suggestions if since we are about halfway through the book, if you would like to give us suggestions as to stuff that we could go ahead and tackle next, feel free to, you can get in touch with either Leakai or you can get in touch with us. We're pretty much always on Twitter. All of us are always on Twitter in some shape, form, or fashion.
Yeah, the easiest way to get a hold of me is to get through my Discord, which the link to that is in the description of all of my videos, which we did an awesome interview last night. You guys should totally check that out. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, let's go check that out.
Yeah.
All this too. We are going to be on Friday with Dan on Truth Wanted.
Yes.
So that's going to be fun.
That just happened today.
Yeah, he sent us a message today and asked us if we were going to come on Friday. So that's going to be at 5 o'clock Pacific time. That's a different time if you don't live on the West Coast. So you do the math. I'm not willing to do so. And then on Sunday. Yeah. Sunday, Ilya Moon's channel. Talking about some, kind of like some of the stuff we talked about last night, but more in the societal type of sense instead of religious. And then something else, I forget. I don't know.
Next week, we're covering chapter 9.
Yeah, that too.
Woo!
Right, next week.
Yeah. We have the first episode of our new show, Explain Like I'm 5. That is going to be starting on August 1st. That is at... No, I want you with me.
Oh, no, I'm just pointing, saying...
Oh, it was all like, I want you with me.
I didn't know what day it was starting, so there's that.
It is August 1st, which is a Saturday. It is at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Of course, the lovely Aaliyah Kai is our first guest on that show, so I'm very excited. For those who didn't hear the official announcement last night, it's called Explain Like I'm 5. It's basically we're getting people from various communities to come on and talk about things that they love, things that they're very passionate about. It doesn't necessarily have to be whatever they are typically pigeonholed for. you are talking about the waste-free cooking tomorrow, right?
Yes. I'm talking about like scrap cooking and waste-free cooking, basically ways to use up extra food, planning around the things that are expensive and finding ways to use them up before they go bad. And if you have a garden, ways to use part of your plants that would normally be discarded before stuff even went to the store. So like, cooking leek tops the way you would kale, things like that. So that is something that I geek out about. Anybody who's ever like hung out in the food porn section of any Discord that I'm in will have seen tons and tons of pictures of the crazy stuff that I cook. But I've learned how to use up scraps because, there's 4 people in my house and only 2 major incomes at the moment. And one of them was cut for a good chunk. My sales have been down. So we've learned very quickly how to not waste anything.
Mm-hmm.
On my side for announcements, I have a video premiering on Thursday night at 9 p.m. EST, 6 p.m. PST called Do Pagans Worship Demons? I go into the history of demons, like where the term came from, what they were defined as in Greek culture, and whether or not they actually existed in Jewish culture, in the Old Testament in particular, which most of the scholars that I read argued they don't, at least is the way that they're conceptualized now. So that's going on. And then I have a special stream going on Saturday. We have a panel of 4 people who came out as pagan in atheist spaces within our community. We have Witch from What the Craft. We have Raziel from Creepy Eevees. Some of you guys might know them from Cirrus's channel as well. We have Progressive Liberal, who just came out as Religio Romana recently on his channel. And we have Chrissy H., formerly Biblical History Skeptics, who is hanging out in the chat. We're going to be talking about the pushback that pagans often get from anti-theists, and particularly the pressure of being a figurehead within that community and, coming out as no longer atheist. So that's a thing that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, that's going to be really good.
I thought Chris was an atheist.
Yeah.
No, Christy is a Canaanite Reconstructionist.
There's a leak in the boat. I would say it last night too. I just didn't get the chance.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I know. When you mentioned it last night, I didn't get the chance to say it either, and I'm like, motherfucker, man.
I love you so much.
Somebody besides Susan is going to get that one. Yeah, Grumpy, we can talk again too.
I love it. Trying to think of what else.
I don't know.
Soon we'll be bringing back our Wednesday live stream.
Yes, not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow. Not tomorrow.
I'm going to see if we can't have a video up tomorrow, though.
Last announcement on our channel, we've got Callan and Shay from Transgarter coming on to Xenia Bridge to talk about allyship, specifically about how they work together as pagan and atheist to fight for trans rights.
Nice.
Yes, awesome.
Yeah, that'll be a really, really good one too. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I totally stepped all over that. That is totally my bad.
I think that's it, though.
Yeah, that's it for announcements for this upcoming week.
Yeah.
Any prayer requests by anybody in the chat?
Yeah, anybody?
The Christian version, by the way. I'm not going to pray. I'm going to be like people in church and not pray. So you can tell me what your prayer requests are to that one, to Jesus. Yeah. And then I'm going to tell you, okay, and then just like in Baptist churches, I'm not going to pray for you. So,
Can confirm was Baptist.
Yeah.
Among other sects, denominations, and things of that nature.
Yeah, I believe that they in Jesus culture call them denominations.
They do call that. Yeah, I don't know why I said sects first.
No, it makes sense.
I mean, sects and branches is like what you use for anything other than Christianity. So
trees.
I see what you did there. All right,
but
unappreciated in my fucking time. I swear, somebody's gonna watch this 70 years from now. Whenever I'm dead, it's gonna be like Van Gogh. But today, not like yesterday. Whenever I brought up Danny Carey from totally socially relevant rock band Tool, and nobody laughed.
I snickered, but I was muted.
A single fucking person. 70 years from now, whenever I'm dead, somebody's going to stumble upon that little part of the video, and they're going to be like,
Danny Carey!
This guy's so fucking funny.
Point,
this guy must have been like the comedian of his time.
But
it's
at that
great.
point, Danny Carey will be relevant again.
Yeah, this Tool will be relevant again. They'll be a classic.
Yeah.
They're already classic.
Cyclical.
They've been on early 2000s.
That's one last reason to shill that interview from last night, by the way. If you guys want to see a sneak peek of their upcoming video, which has been a long time in the making, we actually played about 3 minutes of it on the show last night. They were nice enough to do that. So if you guys are interested in what he was talking about, it's a lot about sports ball. And again, I'm doing that specifically to spite you because I love you, Nathaniel, and like trolling you is that's part of being friends with me. I'm sorry. But it's about specifically crappy mascots and how those things need to stop being a problem.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of education.
Yeah,
there's a lot of education in it.
He is, as always, Nathaniel is very, very good at breaking things down in a very understandable and relatable manner. So we have mostly him. I shouldn't say we, mostly him. He's been doing a lot of research on a lot of different things. So it has evolved from what it initially was going to be into something that is, I know it's a very, very personal video for him, and
yeah.
Sorry, I'm just talking for
you. No, it's things that I've said to you, and so it's also going to piss a lot of white people off. So that's exciting, making it that way. Sorry, I'm not sorry, white America.
Well, and I gave Nathaniel props then, and I'll give you props again now. Thank you so much for including us in the conversation. Native Americans get left out so often in these sorts of discussions, and so the fact that you included that spot means a lot to me.
Oh yeah, we were actually deciding yesterday afternoon which one we're going to use, because we have two of them that we were considering. Both of them are sports, Allie. So, that'll hurt your ears for 10 minutes. And
hey, you know what? I used to play American football, so, I make fun of it because it's out of love.
Nobody here that heard you say football is going to think anything other than that. Anyways.
You never know.
Yeah, I do.
And okay, I'm half Brit, okay? You just remember this.
Yeah, you live in Washington.
It's true.
Yeah, Dean, everything that you say as an apologist is a script, okay? Seriously, I predicted what you were going to say and typed it out and sent it to somebody before you said it. It's not my fault that you're predictable. It's not. You guys all say the same things. Sorry, Dean Meadows is in the chat, and so I figured I would, because he was on earlier, and I predicted what he was going to say to this atheist, and then I was right, because I actually sent it to somebody else. Said, this is what Dean's going to say. And I was right. And then that's why your friendly neighborhood atheist laughed.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. So,
right, so we were wrapping up, I believe.
We always.
Yeah.
Distractions. I do that, though. I
the ADHD is strong in the room. All three of us, just all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank y'all so much for joining us. We do really, really appreciate it. Thank y'all so much.
Stop listening.
Be sure to catch us next week.
Turn off.
Are you talking to the AC?
No, I'm talking to this little mini.
Oh.
Stop listening to us, Google.
Google does that. Thank y'all so much. We really, really appreciate y'all being here. Be sure to catch us next week for Chapter 9. I said Chapter 8. It is Chapter 9, a secular literary circle for Dr. Bart Ehrman's Heaven and Hell. Check out everything. Links in the description. We will see y'all later.
Yeah, as soon as I find the mouse. There it is.
There we go.
If only there was something you could do to have this on somewhere and it could just, just turn